Says I'm live. Can I hear myself? Cool. I guess I sound pretty good. My hair's a little messed up. But so it goes. So I'm going to jump in the middle of the paragraph here. I apologize. I guess uh, if you want to listen to everything, you have to read the, you have to buy the book. But this is starting in chapter 2, the section called "The Yellow River." I just realized my pencil needs to be sharpened. I think this is plugged in. Yeah, but sorry. I know pencil sharpening ASMR. Let's go. Once the Long River reaches central China, the Long River is the Yangtze River. So I'll try to fill you in as we make our way through here. Reaches central China below Ichiang, Ichiang. It has room to spread out more in more leisurely fashion. As the relaxing after the rigors of the gorges, once again tributaries begin to join it, just as the, the Ohio and the Missouri join the Mississippi. These are important river systems as well, and because they enter the Long River from both the north and the south, they form a transportation and human migration network in use from the remote past to the present. Classical Chinese civilization, carried by soldiers, officials, and land-hungry peasants, spread from the north into central China and thence into south and southwest China. By these riverine and lowland routes, in this migration of power and population, not yet even today quite complete, is in the southwestern portion of Quechua in Yunnan. Indigenous non-Chinese people were killed, driven out, absorbed, or pushed into remote and marginal terrain where enclaves still exist. The counterpart in China of the conquest of North America by the white man at the expense of native populations. At the southwestern headwaters of the two major north-flowing tributaries, canals and portages were used for many centuries to cross the Linga, Lingnan Divide and enter the river system that ultimately um, conv- river systems that ultimately converge on the Canton. Following into the Long River from the south, the most important of these tributary systems are the Xiang River, uh, whose basin forms the core of Hunan province, um, which is Mao Zedong's native province. The book feels it's good for you to know that. In the Kan River the Kan River farther east, draining the province of Yangtze near the river mouths of the Xiang and Kan, where they prepare to join the Long River, are two of the largest lakes in China. Two of the myriad lakes and marshlands of central China formed by the actions of the Long River below the gorges. These lakes, Tung and Ting, fed by the Xiang and several other large tributaries, and Poyang at the mouth of the Kan, give names to the provinces of central China. These provinces are Hunan and Hubei. Hunan meaning south of the lakes, and Hubei meaning north of the lakes. Tongting, Poyang, and other lakes of the region form a natural, th- though only partially effective, mechanism for control of flooding and water level in the Long River. As a result of the spring runoff and summer rains, the lakes fill up, covering reedy marshes and swamps and providing deep enough water for large craft. In autumn and winter, when the river is low, water flows out of the lake and back into the Long River. The lakes gradually recede and marshlands appear once again. Insects, freshwater, clams, and mussels, fish, and birds of all kinds thrive in the periodic rise and fall of the lakes, a rich ecological cycle that now may be threatened by the damming of the river. Unfortunately, these large lakes, and especially Lake Tongting, have been shrinking rapidly in both size and depth over the past century or so. Part of this infilling is natural. The gradual sitting up silting up of low-lying basins through the action of the long river. But the rate at which silt is accumulating has been greatly accelerated by the side effects of diking strategies. These strategies have helped somewhat with flood control, but they have also greatly increased the inflow of silt, while simultaneously reducing the natural flushing capacity of the lake and river system. The other major force reducing the size of the lake is agricultural encroachment, land reclamation, and polder fields, intruding even further on what was once part of the lake. Over the past century, almost 1.3 million acres of farmland have been created out of Lake Tongue. In this way, the lake is now, at many seasons, little more than a collection of inland estuaries. This natural flood control mechanism has long given its clue to man, always ready to alter nature in what he deems to be his own interests. Dikes have been in use for centuries, particularly on the left bank. The dikes served well enough during normal years, but failed in times of unusual high water, causing great loss of life and destruction of farmland. The present government has lengthened, reinforced, and elevated these dikes. It has also straightened out many of the bends in the river, shortening its course by about 50 miles and easing its flow somewhat. But the largest project is the Chiang diversion basin along the south shore of the river. Put into initial operation in the early 1950s, this system, which compensates in part for the shrinking of the lake Yangtze depends on a diversion dike that can be opened during high water in order to drain off a portion of the flow, thus creating a temporary man-made lake. In this way, the rise of water level in in this way, the rise of water level in the main channel can be slowed and the pressure against the dike system reduced. Since the area is required for flood control only at infrequent intervals, peasants are strongly tempted to colonize the fertile bottomland for agricultural use, though of course they do so at their own peril. When nearly unprecedented high water poured through the gorges in 1954, this work paid off. Even so, the population of Hankow, central China, central China's most important city, was mobilized in huge sandbag brigades. For 48 hours, the issue was in doubt. Then the last and highest crest passed, and Han Cow was saved. Upstream and down, the flood did great human and property damage, but much less than that brought on by the disaster of 1931, when the river crested 6 feet lower than in 1954. But all along the dikes failed. No, so all along the river, the dikes failed. Vast tracts of land in Hupei were submerged, and for 2 weeks in the streets of Hankow, boats were the only way of getting around. An estimated 140,000 people were drowned in the floodwaters, and another 3 million rendered homeless. And so the Long River makes its way to Hankow at an elevation of 75 feet above sea level and 640 miles inland. From here to the ocean, the slope of the river averages about an inch and a half per mile, in enormous contrast to the Yangtze persona of the river as the river of golden sand, where in some places the fall is hundreds of feet per mile. At Hankow, the Long River receives its largest northern tributary, the Han River. Millennia before present day, Wuhan was founded. This was already an area of crucial strategic significance. The Han River gave its name 2,200 years ago to the first long-lived dynasty of China's imperial history, the Han Dynasty, rever- um, existing from 206 BC to 220 AD, whose power and glory and whose legacy to subsequent history rivals that of the contemporary Roman Empire in the West. Han Khao means mouth of the Han. It is the largest river of the three cities situated at this confluence, and together they make up the most important metropolis in the central reaches of the Long River. The three cities, Hankow, Hanyang, and Wuchang, are collectively called Wuhan, a portmanteau place name somewhat like Texarkana. Um, I don't think I know what that word means, so a bad American. As a center of commerce and industry, Hankow began to overshadow its older siblings in the early 19th century, and it had begun and had continued to do so ever since. Despite having been nearly razed during the Taiping Rebellion, um, being which was 1850 to 1864, and seriously damaged by the time of the 1911 revolution, when the last imperial dynasty was overthrown. One of Han Kao's great virtues is that ocean-going vessels as large as 10,000 tons can steam directly up the Yangtze to the very heart of central China, where other major tributaries serve as avenues to collect products for export or to distribute imports. The nodality does much to explain Hankau's importance. Yep, just taking a break. The next section is titled The Lower River and the Delta. Below Wuhan, the long river continues its stately march in the sea, resembling this, in some ways the Mississippi between St. Louis and the Gulf of Mexico. But as Mark Twain described, the Mississippi is broad. Apparently, the Mississippi. Its broad, apparently calm surface hides many treacherous shoals, bars, and snags. So it is with the Yangtze, for it is in the area around Nanking that the Long River was traditionally called by that name. Once the Yangtze passes the Han River and Lake Poyang, the East China Plain is so flat that the river receives no important tributaries. It needs none, for its slow pace and its volume of water broadens it so that in some seasons a person cannot see from one shore to the other. Marco Polo, back home in Italy, was ridiculed when he claimed a river more than 10 miles broad, but for summer months near the estuary, his estimate was quite accurate. Ish. That's a long, long distance. There is one exception, not a tributary in the natural sense, but the man-made Grand Canal. As a feat of engineering and human labor, it surpasses even the Great Wall. Canal building in this region had begun before the birth of Christ, or the full incorporation of this region into classical Chinese civilization. By the 6th century, the fertile lower Yangtze region was far outstripping North China in agricultural production, especially in rice, that most productive of grains. There was, however, no efficient way to carry its surplus to the north, where the capital and the dominant centers of political and military power were still located. At the outset of the second great period of imperial unification, the Sui and the Tang dynasty of the sixth to the to 10th centuries, canals were linked up and greatly extended northward across the Yangtze all the way to North China. Another major extension was made by the Mongols in the 1280s to bring the Grand Canal to the vicinity of Peking at its greatest extent. It ran from it ran for 1,115 miles from Hangzhou to Peking. Today, about 700 miles of the Grand Canal are in active use, and the other sections are being put back in service. Today being not today. It's probably this book was published probably um, in 1988. So today being 1988, things are being put back in service. Um, like the lower reaches of all great rivers, most of the land near the mouth of the Yangtze was built up by the river itself in a never-ending, still continuing process. To the layman, the measures of water and sediment discharged by the river each year are so large as to be unintelligible. Easier to understand is that every 70 years the delta is built another mile into the sea. Chengming Island in the mouth of the river was a mere sandbar when first mentioned in the historical records in about 600 AD. By 1200, it was an island large enough to support a permanent population. Today, it comprises 300 square miles and a population of nearly 2 million. The Long River not only builds the land, but discolors the sea. Sailors have always known when they were approaching this great estuary by the midday, the muddy color of the water seeping seaward up to 70 miles. The last area through which the Long River flows is the Delta region, which, in a somewhat expansive sense, comprises approximately the triangle bounded by a line from Hangzhou to Nanking. The river itself and the sea, this uh, region is called Changnan, or in English, south of the river, a term that connotes the much greater development and prosperity of the southern region than the area north of the Yangtze in almost every way: agriculture, traditional crafts, and now modern industry, culture, sophistication, in almost every way, and then it lists all these ways. The Qiangnan has been a key area for many centuries. It is a rich, low-lying alluvial plain with many lakes and few low hills. Almost as much water as land, virtually all cities and towns are connected by a dense network of streams and canals. From Shanghai, one can go in an inland direction for at least 100 miles by water. Let's fall asleep, so shift positions. But now we're going to talk about Shanghai. So it's good. I'm also reading a book, although it doesn't talk much about Shanghai. It's in the titles. I'm reading The Last Boat Out of Shanghai. So the ocean port served by and serving the entire Yangtze system is Shanghai. Shanghai was only a third-rate fishing and trading port until the mid-19th century, but with the coming of the West, the opening of the so-called treaty port, and China's increasing involvement in global trade patterns, Shanghai rapidly grew to become the most important economic city in China. Shanghai is a triumph of strategic. Gosh, both my feet are asleep. um, a strategic location over local disadvantages that might reasonably have disqualified it as a major port. It sits on the west bank of the Huangpu River, the last tributary entering the Long River before it debouches into the sea. It is a trivial tributary by comparison with the river upstream, and it snakes its way narrowly northward to join the main flow a few miles behind Ming Island. Constantly dredging is necessary. Constant dredging is necessary to get ocean-going ships across the bars at ferry flats near the mouth of the Yangtze and into the Huangpu. Once inbound ships make the left turn that will take them upstream the Shanghai, there is very um, up them take them up river to Shanghai. There's very little maneuvering room. Ships anchor, moor, or come alongside wharfs on both sides of the river, all the way from Wusong at the Huangpu Yangtze Junction to Shanghai itself. Um, Yet the disadvantages of this unfavorable port arrangement are far outweighed by Shanghai's access to the entire Yangtze Valley. By the late 19th century, Shanghai was already preeminent as a trade city and as the largest center of foreign investment and residence in China. It had far surpassed Canton, concentrated prior, where the only China trade had been concentrated prior to 1850. Even the development of the British Hong Kong, which helped to stimulate sorry, which helped to stimulate the economy, did not enable Canton to keep up with Shanghai's meteoric growth. With the turn of the 20th century, added modern industry to its own activities as Shanghai added modern industry to its other activities, as in industrializing as most industrializing nations, light industry, and especially textile and food processing, were among the first to spring up. Canton and silk, sorry, cotton and silk were both highly developed handicraft industries with conveniently available sources of supply, and it was relatively easy to supply both the raw materials and cheap labor. Large numbers of young women and children among them, necessary to get factories up and running. The largest and best capitalized of these industries were owned by the British and the Japanese, with Chinese industrialists competing under a number of crippling disadvantages, but somehow surviving and making money in time. Heavy industry, shipyards, and iron and steel manufacturing were added to commerce and light industry. Shanghai was also a major Asian banking center, a major center of financial speculation, currency exchange, operations, and get-rich-quick schemes of all kinds. By the 1930s, fully one half of all foreign investments in China were concentrated in, sorry, all foreign investment in China was concentrated in Shanghai, and nearly half of all foreign residents in China lived in Shanghai. Um, in the foreign-run international settlements or French concession. And that is referenced quite a lot in the book I'm reading, so it's cool to see it from the inside. For many Chinese, Shanghai was a magnet drawing them in, even as they found much of what Shanghai stood for repugnant, cruel, and humiliating. This was the Shanghai where, along the waterfront bund in the international settlement, where were posted signs barring dogs in Chinese. Yep, from using the park facilities, but this was also they mentioned that in every book. I probably read that like 6 times in different books from using the park facilities. But this was also the Shanghai where revolutionaries a price on their head. What? I'm sorry. So these also, this was the Shanghai where along the waterfront bund in the international settlement where posted signs barring dogs and Chinese from using the park facilities. But this was also the Shanghai where revolutionaries, a price on their head, could put themselves beyond the reach of Chinese law and find haven in their very enclaves ruled by foreign imperialism. Sun Yat-sen often took refuge in the foreign settlements, and the Chinese Communist Party was found in the French concession in 1921. Um, meanwhile, most of the waterfront, the opium business, most of the waterfront, the opium business, prostitution, and gambling were run by mafia-type outfits like the Green Gang, headed by Tu Yue Sheng, known to some as Big Ears too. Like the mafia, the Green Gang was a brotherhood, a ruthless quasi-family that had its 19th century origins among displaced transport workers on the Grand Canal. In the chron- in the chronicle in the chronically poverty-stricken and disaster-prone areas north of the Yangtze River. Missionaries, educators, and reformers of all kinds joined traders, industrialists, adventurers, and fast buck operators, the very wealthy and down and outers. The flotsam of the world could be found in Shanghai, along with the white Russian refugees and stateless Jews. Altruism and culture thrived alongside the most apparent greed and materialism in America. Shanghai became a watchword for the exotic and the sinister, and everyone knew what it meant to be Shanghaied. It was Sin City, where anything goes. No one ever caught the kaleidoscope character of pre-revolutionary Shanghai better than Edgar Snow in his autobiography, Journey to the Journey to the Beginning. Describing his first impressions of Shanghai after his arrival in China, a young journalist fresh out of the University of Mississippi, Western businessman who Mississippi, Western businessmen who lived there when I arrived in 1928 act, uh, acted as if the settlement were real and would last forever. Oh, Western businessmen who lived there when I arrived in 1928 acted as if the settlement were real and would last forever. In their euphoria, they felt that they were the continent and the 400 million people of China beyond were kind of a suburb put there by God for trading purposes. And yet it was fascinating. Yes, I'm skipping so many words. And yet it was a fascinating old and Sodom Gomorrah at that while it lasted. At first, I too mistook Shanghai for China. The bizarre contrasts of old and new, the sublime ugliness of the past, its kind of polyglot glamour, and its frank money is all vulgarity held and um and frank money is all vulgarity held me in puzzled wonder. The streets of downtown Shanghai likewise seemed a continuous freak circus at first, unbelievably alive with all manner of people performing almost every physical and social function in public, yelling, gesturing, always acting, crushing, thronging, spilling through every kind of traffic, precariously amidst old cars and new ones, and between coolies racing wildly to compete for rickshaw fares, gingerly past honey carts filled with excrement dragged down bubbling well road, sardonically past perfumed, exquisite gowned and mid-thigh exposed Chinese ladies, jestingly um, past the Herculean barebacked coolie trundling his taxi wheelbarrow, a load of six giggling servant girls en route to home or work, carefully before singing peddlers portable kitchen ready with bearing portable kitchens ready with delicious noodles on the spot. Loving Lovingly under gold-lettered shops overflowing with fine silk and brocades, deadpanning past village woman staring wide-eyed at frightened Indian policemen. Gravely past gambling mahjong, ivories clicking, and the jai alai and pari mutal betting. Um, Slyly through the streets, hung with the heavy, sweet, acrid smell of opium, sniffing past southern restaurants and brightly lighted sing-song houses, indifferently past scrubbed, aloof young Englishmen in their Austins popping off to cricket on the race course, snickeringly around elderly white gentlemen in carriages with their wives or Russian mistresses out for the cool air along the Bund, and hastily past sailors looking for beer and woman. From noisy dawn to plangent night, the endless hawking and spitting, the baby's urine stream on the curb, the Amma scolding. Amma. Yeah, I forget what the Amma is. I think Mother. That's what I think it was Mother. That's what the girl in a lot of these are kind of coming back to me, but specifically the Amma is a word that you would never hear uh, in America, but it's I think the woman in the book uh, calls their adopted mother Amma. Uh, I think it means mother. I forget. Um, the high falsetto of opera at Wing on Gardens, where a dozen plays went on at once, and hotel rooms next door filled up with plump virgins procured for wealthy merchants in front of provinces for business and debauch. The wail of dance bands moaning for slender, bejeweled Chinese taxi giant dancers, the whine of innumerable beggars and their naked, unwashed infants, the glamour of the Wangpu with its white fleets of foreign warships, its shaggy freighters, its fan-sailed junks, its thousand lanterns lit sampans darting fireflies on the moon-silvered water filled with deadly pollution. Shanghai, what it says. Um, I guess this was taken from his book. Um, After 1949, all this changed. As Snow predicted, Shanghai had waxed fat and corrupt, and was soon to pay a dismaying price for the past its Western heirs had forgotten. History always collects, and the Chinese had waited 100 years. No more foreign settlements or foreign warships. No more green gang. No more wealthy merchants from the provinces for business and debauch. Within a few short years, Shanghai apparently became one of the most orderly and least notorious cities in the world. Despite its dramatic changes in outward appearance, however, Shanghai has remained China's most important economic industrial center and a major political force as well. The same force that made Shanghai a great city after 1850 continued to make it a great city more than a century later. Yet, without the Yangtze, Shanghai would not exist as we know it. Uh, in neither, in either its pre-revolutionary or post-revolutionary incarnation. On the other hand, long before Shanghai became an important city, the Yangtze was an important river from the perspective of Shanghai. It is difficult to bring to mind the glaciers and snow of the lofty plateau on which the great river has its source, and down which we have just journeyed so quickly We now return to the Yangtze to look more closely at the spectacular region called the Three Gorges, a region from which one can look upward toward the young and turbulent river or downward toward the ancient placid stretches in the sea. So this next section is titled "The Three Gorges." Can you read that? Yeah, you can. Okay. So I'm not going to read that now. I have to go pick up groceries. But hope you enjoyed that little 30 minutes. Maybe I'll keep reading. Bye.